And we are recording episode 754 on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022. And as I was just telling Mr. Paquette, I have a jacket on because my maintenance guy did something, and my air conditioner is turbocharged now. It feels a little bit more like a meat freezer, and I love the cold, but that's why I'm wearing a jacket inside. And none of that is relevant to anything we're discussing today. Mr. Paquette, please introduce yourself, sir.
Yeah, my name is Jeffrey Sosa-Paquette, and I'm running for Congress here in District 2 in Massachusetts against Congressman Jim McGovern, who's been our congressman for the last 3 decades.
3 decades?
3 decades. And, when you look for your ultimate insider, I look at it this way a little differently. He got to DC in 1977 to go to college, then became a staffer, and then became our congressman. So he has never left DC since he was 18 years old. And when he got there, I was 7 years old. So I really look at him and say, when I did that math on it, I'm like, wait a minute, you got to DC when I was 7? I'm 51 years old. You've been there for a long time.
Yeah, and no real world experience. You're there. No. It's like the people that go to college and become a professor and they stay there. And it might be a great professor, but at the same time, it's like you can't really lecture on anything outside of your specific. If you teach physics, that's fine, but like you can't lecture anyone on international trade. It's like, dude, you've never left that biosphere, right?
Correct.
And I started this podcast 2 years ago when I was 29. I'd gone to college, gotten to medical school and pharmacy school. Did a whole lot, have my own life experiences. And I was looking at your website. I mean, you started your own business and sold it by the time you were 29, correct?
Yes, I did. I started my first company when I was 23, and like my website says, I started with literally $100 in cash and a $5,000 credit line. And I started a little 400 square foot pet supply and grooming store that I had a staff member that, ran the store, and I, maintained my job because obviously the business wasn't going to pay me or pay the bills while we were building it. And then, fast forward that 6 years, my first year in business, I did $56,000. And by the time I sold the company, I was doing just shy of 7 million in sales, 7 locations and 112 employees. And I sold it when I was 29. And then, after I was done selling it, that's when I went back to school. Unfortunately, I had to leave school when I was 16 years old. My father went to jail for 20 years. I have not spoken to my father since I was 16. Unfortunately, he molested my sisters. And so I left school to be able to take care of my brothers and sisters and help my mother. And I grew up, basically, hard work and determination get you where you want to be. You can't cry over the things that have happened in life. It's, people will respect you for what you've overcome or have pity on you for what you can't overcome, but you can't pick, choose, both. You have to pick. And obviously I chose respect and, built myself up. And, so I got my high school diploma when I was 29 years old after I had turned myself into a self-made millionaire. Then I started college at Becker University, and I've taken, I think at this point, I've got like 168 credits, not put them to any specific degree. It was all classes that I wanted to take. Sometimes it was in the childcare because I'm in the childcare business now. Or, in banking when I was in the banking time, so any classes I take right to this day are choices that I make. They're classes that I want to learn about. But, other than that, I think, if I'm looking for a job, my resume speaks quite clearly for itself, and no one's looking to say, what is your degree specifically in? They're looking at my experience.
Yeah. I mean, how many people can say they became a millionaire and then got their high school diploma?
One of the things I always, I try to pass that forward, and what I'm always teaching people through my whole career, I always take the underdog and teach them, what, stop whining. I'm gonna show you how you do these, these steps and how you move through life. Your choice is to either learn from me or not learn from me. If you're willing to put the effort in, I'm willing to show you how do I turn you into a six-figure, employee a year. It's not just the businesses that I've owned, at the same time of owning my own businesses, I've here in New England, I ran two of the largest Toyota dealerships, in New England. The last dealership I had, and so, for example, it was ranked 73 out of 76 dealerships, meaning it was really bad. It took me 7 months, and I turned that dealership around from the bottom 73 to in the top 10. And then 3 months after that, for the remaining few years that I ran that dealership, it was number one, number two, and number three and stuff. And it's all about customer service and teaching people, listen to your customers, stop trying to be a snake. When you think about like politicians, sometimes and stuff, there's truth when people complain about the car business and that there's snakes out there. There really is. And, the industry's come a long way in getting rid of that scenario of, just rolling people over. And a lot of that has to do with technology and stuff. People know what their cars are worth now. They know, what a car should be sold for. So, dealerships can't pull the crap that, let's say they used to pull in the 90s and stuff, or really even the early 2000s. Technology is kind of taking care of that. And that's the way it should be. And that's what we want. But in running the dealerships and stuff, like I said, I made them number one and stuff just in pure customer satisfaction. And that's how I, grew those businesses. That's how I've grown my own daycares and stuff. I haven't, when you think of my own business in the childcare business, I've been in it now 20 years. And I would venture to say I have not spent $1 in the last 10 years on any form of marketing for my business. It is all word of mouth. Do your job. I'm on a 3-year wait list, so I have no reason that I need to advertise and stuff. By doing my job and teaching my staff how to do their job and stuff, the business is successful. The staff that's been with me has been with me for over a decade, so I don't have staff rollover. And, and that really comes from, I take care of my employees. And, one of the examples I would give you on that is, the last time we had these crazy gas prices, $4, $4.29 a gallon, what we have here and stuff, that goes back to 2008, 2009, when we were in that exact same scenario and stuff. And what was happening in the childcare business, and I had just bought 3 daycares on top of the one that I had at that particular moment. And then all of a sudden, when all hell broke loose with gas prices and stuff, parents were, for example, you're off on Monday, I'm off on Tuesday. What parents were doing was figuring out their days off and started watching each other's kids. So full-time enrollment got, whittled down by 50%. So Julian and me, Julian's my husband, I said, okay, what are we going to do here? One, we just put out $1 million buying these centers. And, our revenue has been cut in half and stuff. So Julian and me made a decision that the 54 teachers that work for us would not lose their jobs and stuff. We ran our businesses every day from 7 to 2 in the afternoon. Then the two of us, not wanting any form of management job, but needed to just bring money in to make sure our mortgage and our kids were taken care of. The two of us would get to Chipotle's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and roll burritos till midnight and then double on the weekends. And that's how we pulled through the next 10 months and we rebuilt the business. And every one of my teachers maintained their jobs. And those teachers still work for me today.
Hell yeah.
And stuff. And I'd like to see a little bit more of that out of politicians and stuff, that they actually understand that their decisions affect somebody's personal life. And that's when I look at like Jim McGovern, he doesn't know what it means to build a business, sign a paycheck, go get a job to protect your own employees. That's more important than your own self-worth at that particular moment. Or when I say self-worth, I mean your own wealth and stuff. You do what you're supposed to and commit to your employees, because although I disagree when Obama says you didn't build that, the way I interpret it as a business owner is I absolutely built the business, took the risks, put my house up, for collateral, all of those type of things. But the truth is, no business can grow without your employees. I mean, that's just factual. So if you're going to grow a business, you've got to grow your employees with them. And that's just been my philosophy. And I've told all of my employees through my whole life, It's stuff. Work for the guy. Don't work for the guy that pays the lowest, because that's just a selfish SOB and stuff. The guy that pays you at the top level and stuff sounds good for that 6 months or 1 year, but when the business gets tough, who do they lay off? The top paid employees. And stuff. Pay for the person that is steady and taking care of you right in the middle, and you're going to move right through life just the way that we want them to. And that's where I've always placed myself, is just be right in the middle, and do what is responsible for your employees and for your business. And that's how we built our life. And getting into politics and stuff really stems from a few different things. Being in the childcare business, I work with 90%, 95% of all the families I work with are families that are below the poverty line and stuff. So they're on some form of government voucher, et cetera, et cetera. And you watch, and I'll just give an example. Let's say a single mother that has 2 kids. She's required to go to school and finish her school, or go to college, or work. There's a requirement. You got to do one or the other. So let's assume mom's working. She's got her college degree now, and she's working. And now what happens is, we want people to go to work, to build a career, get raises, and rise through the ranks and stuff. The systems, the way the Democrats have set up these systems, is the first time mom gets that $1 an hour raise, what happens is now all of a sudden she makes too much money. So the voucher is paying my center for her 2 kids $650 a week to have the kids in care while she goes to work. Well, how does a $40 a week raise wipe out a $650 benefit? So what happens is that mother has to quit her job and start all over. And you watch this cycle just keep repeating itself. And, in the 20 years I've been doing this and stuff, I'm witnessing the 3rd generation coming through, that I'm like, wait a minute, none of these families were lifted up out of poverty. We're going from grandmother to child to grandchild, and every one of these generations are just repeating. It's a cycle that people are trapped in. So then I said to myself, well, where are the Republicans? Why are they not, for lack of a different way to say it, I don't want to say why are they not smart enough, but really, why are you not smart enough to say we must put in a step down program that as they rise, maybe you're going to have a parent fee or something like that, but you can't just strip the benefits away, because what was the benefit of sending her to college or doing any of these things that have already been spent if you're not going to then let her climb the ladder that she can lift herself and her children up? So that's one of the reasons that I decided to run. And so when I look at the millennials is where my attention got focused on at first and stuff, was they're the first generation that's doing worse than their parents. Then you look at the Gen Zs and go, okay, not only are they doing worse than their parents, they're potentially doing worse than the millennials. So then I looked at my own children. My daughter is 20 years old in her 2nd year of college, and my son is 11, and I'm looking at my kids going, oh, good God, we're going to repeat this whole this whole thing again. I don't know how you're going to do better than these ones. And so I really started digging in and just really looking at things and saying, does anybody have any common sense and stuff, and really looking at, like I look at college, and one of the things I would propose, and when I get to Congress is, if a school is going to charge a student, let's say $75,000 a year to go to school, then that student must come out of school with a degree that they get a job at minimum of $75,000 a year. And let's say they only get a $50,000 a year job. Then that university is responsible to pay back $100,000 of that student's debt, because they did not get the job that equals the cost of the education. And when you start putting parameters like that on the universities, that's going to force, a lot of these fake degrees, and say, you can't get a job off of this, so we're not going to do this anymore. Or it's going to force down the cost of tuition. One way or the other, you've got to hold these universities accountable.
Okay, yeah.
And stuff, so that's something that I look at. That I think we've got to fix that. I'm right there to tell everybody, I'm not going to be a vote that will allow the lifting of the national, what am I trying to say, debt limit. and stuff, because all we're doing every time we raise the debt ceiling, we're just simply stealing money from a generation that's not even born yet, let alone how does the millennials, the Gen Zs that even begin to pay this stuff. We're so far in the future in debt that we've got to stop the debt and stuff and start looking at ways that we need to cut and look and say, what don't we need? What doesn't work? And get the government within its means and stuff, because it's, when you look at security of the country and stuff, our national debt is very, dependent on our security, just right along with, when we look at our energy, America must be energy independent with a pathway that generates the money to move us to renewables and those things. How are we going to do that as a country? We must generate all of our own energy here in America, buying no energy from anybody. There's no reason for it. Generate those dollars, and through taxes, and as you move fossil fuels and stuff, and right now we've got to increase our fossil fuels, but as we do that, create the American jobs, which is the middle class and stuff, take the taxation and whether you do it at 20% over 5 years or wherever we want to do the math, take away the subsidies that the fossil fuel industry is getting and stuff, and shift all those dollars into renewable energy and let the system build itself and stuff. And then we generate the dollars without debt while building back our own middle class. And then if we have excess energy, then by all means sell it and stuff. And if we're going to sell energy out to the world, to me, it should mean that if we sell $100 billion worth of energy, let's say to Germany, then those dollars go right to the national debt and reduce the debt and stuff. And then bring our manufacturing home. Not everybody, is going to school to be a doctor or a therapist or, a tech and stuff. People work with their hands. Yeah. And, one of the things that I was looking at, what happened in the last 25 years, so now I take myself back to when I was 25 years old. And what's the biggest change, when I just drive around New England? All of our manufacturing and stuff is gone and stuff. One of my first jobs that helped me, build money and stuff, I used to be a shift manager at York Steakhouse in the morning, and another job that I did 7 to 2. And then I used to leave there and go to National Sea Products at 3 o'clock and work the second shift till midnight packing fish. Well, you know what? At 21 years old, that job was paying me $19 an hour. And you're going back, that was what, 92?
Yeah.
And stuff. So when you look at it and say, well, that job paid this now. And then what I look at is, think of it this way. Haddock is a cold water fish caught off of, New England, Canada and stuff, but we don't clean it here anymore. We catch it in New England, ship it to China to clean it, and then ship it back.
Yeah.
And my question on this is like, okay, you know what? I'm not saying it was the cleanest job in the world, but if 30 years ago, effectively, the job was paying, $19, $20 an hour then, what would the job be paying now if we cleaned our own fish in our own country where we caught it and stuff? So, this notion that Americans won't do the job, you kind of got to put the job there first.
Yeah.
And stuff and find out, what? I bet you there's people that will do the job.
100%. Yeah. In 2007, I worked at my buddy's dad had a door frame warehouse in Atlanta, and I was making, I think I was making like $10, $12 an hour as a 17-year-old. But even that's just a simple example. Not everyone is going to become a physician. Not everyone's going to go become a theoretical physicist. Though great jobs, there's also nothing wrong with going and becoming a bricklayer or working at a mill or processing plant. That's what the middle class was built on post World War II. And we've taken that thing, we've completely stripped it. And I actually know that specific example that you were talking about. My dad was in the food service industry for 30 plus years. I remember him telling me that story probably about 15 years ago about sending, literally, it was cheaper to send fish that we had caught here across the world to China, have them do the work and send it all the way back. And sure, that's great when you're trying to, I mean, I get the fiduciary responsibility of just trying to squeeze every penny out, but there is a greater cost when the people here don't have jobs. And then they're going to need social nets, those social nets, which are going to be paid for by tax hikes on the very corporations that thought they were pinching every penny. It's there's in general, but you can kind of boil all this down to like a philosophical, like elemental state. And what it is that there's nothing wrong with looking after your own country first. And that doesn't mean fuck the rest of the world. Every country should look after themselves. There's nothing wrong with nationalism. There's nothing wrong with saying we got to take care of our people first. I don't think there's anything wrong about that. It's not xenophobic. It's not racist. It's nothing about that. You take care of yourself and then you can take care of others. But yeah, sorry to interrupt with that little input right there. But moving from there to kind of go back to what you were saying earlier, is that you can either have respect for overcoming it, or you can have, you can be pitied for not being able to. I think that is very applicable to where we are now. One thing I always say about like this podcast, when people ask me for advice, there's one piece of advice I always give, and it's you're owed nothing. Take that and run with it and apply it, and you'll succeed. You're owed nothing. And we can look at where we are right now in the country and say this is so screwed, this is so unfair, inflation, energy dependence, COVID vaccine mandates, or you can look at it and go, okay, this is where we are. Now let's roll our sleeves up and try to get to it. Does that carry over with your mindset on just things are kind of
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, as I say to my children, look, this is the only promise America makes to you. You have the right to succeed or fail. And when you fail, America gives you the opportunity to stand up and go again. I've had I talk about, my successes in life. I've also had a lot of failures. Not every business I touched was I successful with. I tried my hand in the restaurant business, and that was the fastest $1 million I ever made and lost in my life. And I said to myself, okay, I don't belong in the restaurant business.
I did
stuff, but it sounded like a great thing to try.
I did writing and graphic design for a couple of years. Quick high, quick crash. Podcast is working out, so I'm clicking with that. But yeah, no, you have the right, you have the opportunity to succeed. You have the opportunity to go into the casino and try to make it work. No one's going to turn you down at the door because of the color of your skin.
Right. No, and that's it. At the end of the day and stuff, what we're living through right now, yes, just in the woke world, or the social woke and stuff, whether it's our genders, it's our skin colors, it's all of these different things. Guess what? When you move all the smoke and mirrors out of this, you got to go to work and you got to build your life and stuff. And it's really that simple. So, never in my life, the one thing I would say to anybody is never in my life, or if it was happening, I was unaware of it because it was irrelevant to me and stuff. Nobody discriminated against me because, I'm a gay man. I'm the individual that changed the law 21 years ago in New Hampshire to allow same-sex couples to adopt. My attorney was the first adoption. I was the second adoption. The Sosa-Paquette name comes from the fact that we adopted both of our children before, marriage was legal. So we gave both of our kids our last names. And when me and Julian got married, when Rylan was 7 months old, we changed our names to match the kids' names. And, and that's just kind of the way, we moved through it and stuff. And, one of the regrets I have in life is, the argument that was made 21 years ago, why gay people can't adopt, blah, 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 blah. The argument was we were going to indoctrinate our children. We were going to turn them gay and stuff. So now fast forward that 2 decades, the first generation of about 30,000 kids has been raised in the LGBT community. And guess what? Our children are not gay or no different of a 1% than anybody else's kids and stuff. But what is happening 2 decades later is that our schools and our teachers and stuff and our unelected bureaucrats are indoctrinating our children, erasing history. And when I look at, the LGBT community, I look at it this way. We got all of our rights in 15 years. So I lived through, I came out of the closet in 88, at the when AIDS was all happening, all of this different stuff. But when you look at when we started moving, we got our rights to adopt, marry, have all the constitutional protections of everybody else. And we did it in 15 years. And we did it without burning buildings, doing all this crazy crap that we see today. And, so one of the regrets that I have is my generation didn't teach the next generation. What did we do? Because we didn't behave like this, and we didn't scream people down, and we just didn't do these things and stuff. And that's how we paved the pathway. And what I'm looking at is, we're undoing the work that we did, because now you're firing up old arguments, or people are going, see, we knew they were going to go too far. And quite frankly, I do believe they're going too far. And the sad part about it is the majority of this is not coming out of the LGBT community. I always say it's the woke straight people that think they want to tell me how to live my life.
Yeah.
And I say that, even when I think about, let's think about Black Lives Matter, right? Go look at all the rallies and all the different things. How come only 2% of the groups that are out there are Black and brown, and everybody else is white? So you're going, all right, so you're basically projecting what you think. How about you just sit down, shut up? We've solved this, and for the LGBT community to put us in think that we've somehow been marginalized or victimized and stuff, like, okay, go look at what women went through, look at what the Black community went through, those type of things. We can make those arguments in those circumstances, but you can't make that argument in the LGBT community and stuff. And if anything and stuff, the thing that I fought against, 2 decades ago was to stop discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. And the LGBT community is doing exactly what we fought to stop. We are, I look at the community and go, we are the most obnoxious, discriminatory group out here right now. And I find it embarrassing. And I have no problem saying it and stuff, because this shouldn't be happening. And we certainly shouldn't be teaching our children that somehow we're victims. And I don't just mean that from the LGBT side. I mean that just right across the board. None of us are victims and stuff. You have opportunities. And you know what? Some of us start at the bottom, some start in the middle, some are born with a silver spoon in their mouth. And as we've all learned, as we grow up, the people that have a silver spoon in their mouth usually are miserable people, and just, what I mean? Like, and stuff. So you really look and go, you know what? The people that are happy are the ones that grew themselves up through the bottom and into the middle class and maintain that. 80% of us agree on the same stuff. So it's not Republican or Democrat and stuff. You've got the 15% of the woke on both political parties that drive all of this nonsense. And this is why I'm out running, going, you know what? My loyalty is to America and to the constituents that I'm going to be representing. And then, the citizens as a whole of America, party be damned, I have to do what is right. So, if I have to take a vote that wasn't necessarily what the far right of the Republican Party wanted us to do, if it's good for you and all the other citizens, then I did my job. In term limits, I'm all about term limits and stuff. You get in there, for me, term limits is for Congress, 2 5-year terms, and you're out, and you don't have the opportunity to then run for senator. Like, pick your lane, whatever lane that is, and you've got this much time. And as a US senator, you got 2 terms and you're out. And so one, you've got to, if you, in my research, I really started looking at, Democrats and Republicans. Show me, their voting history and where did that things change. And pretty much what I was able to figure out is, as you come into that 5th term, that's when all of a sudden your representative no longer represents you. It's really, special interests in their own pockets. I mean, I look at Congressman Jim McGovern. So he's only been in government his whole life. How does someone making, if you average out his salary, from start to end, how does someone making 135,000 a year, when you balance his career, come out to be worth $58 million? You know what I mean? Like I've busted my butt. I just go, I want that trick because I
Yeah.
make more money than that. And I've made more money than that since I was 23 years old. And I'm not worth $58 million.
Yeah.
So teach me the trick of how you did this.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like looking at like steroids and someone that doesn't go to the gym. It's like you go to the gym 5 minutes a week and this guy is jacked. And it's like, what's going on there? What's going like tell me what you're doing. But that is what you kind of segued into what I was going to bring up is, what will you do about insider trading? Because to me, there's nothing, there's no bigger load of horseshit than Nancy Pelosi and Dan Crenshaw outperforming Warren Buffett.
Right. No, I mean, there should be, I mean, for me, it's really simple. Pass legislation that you cannot, and I don't even believe in, a blind trust, right? And stuff, a blind trust, you think of it this way. The trust fund that I have set up, if, God forbid something happened to me for Julian and the kids and stuff, do you think that just because it's in a trust, I can't pick up the phone and call my attorney and say, hey, move this money there, move that, and who knows that I made that phone call? And stuff. So, when I hear, it's in a blind trust, it's kind of like, okay, you know what? I've been around the block a few times. A blind trust, somebody can still call that trustee and stuff. So, we need to just do away with it in its entirety. There's other ways if you're to invest your money, or you just can't do it when you're in Congress. Do a straight 401k like everybody else. Put your money in and then let the government match. And I think that, we're going into, pension funds and everything like that. The biggest debt driver in our country that nobody talks about, right? And I understand from this perspective, people can't wrap their hands around 30 trillion in debt. The last thing that they can wrap their hands around is there's actually about $300 trillion in unfunded pension liabilities across this country and stuff. And okay, who's paying that? And as these unions continue to bring America to their knees and demand more benefits, more this, more that, where's that money coming from? And stuff, they're not funding these liabilities. It's a Ponzi scheme that eventually someone's going to pay the price. And I think, I think we're going to see this happen in my lifetime, that this house of cards is going to come crashing down. And then the American citizens are going to go, what do you mean we owe all these people this money and stuff? Everybody should be just like my employees. You know what? I do a 10% match, which is huge. On a small business, most businesses do a 4 or 5% match. The fact that I'm lucky enough in a small business to be able to match my employees at 10%. And stuff, if they can afford to withhold 10%, they got 10% coming from me. And I encourage them all the time. Put as much money in your retirement account as you can and get as close to my match as you can, because effectively you're getting a 10% raise every year. You're just not touching it. And I think everybody has to live off the same thing. Like me going to Congress, there should be nothing that says that if I win one time, and then I lose my seat the second time, that I still have a pension. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, okay, job's done. I saved for my retirement. I did the things I'm supposed to do, but I'm not supposed to be on the hook to the American taxpayers for the rest of my life. And then my spouse then, continues on that benefit because that's who's surviving me.
Yeah.
And that's the way our teachers unions, by the way, that's the way that works. And stuff, like my CPA, for example, married her high school professor. So there's, I think, 23, 24 years between them. But anyway, this is how one of the reasons I learned it and stuff is her husband obviously lives off his pension as a teacher and stuff. But when he passes away, his pension passes to her until she passes away. And I'm like, well, that's not right. What did that have anything to do with it? Let alone, okay, you're the extreme. Most people don't have 25 years between their spouses and stuff. I said, but basically, effectively, what you're saying is you're going to get another 25 to 30 years of a benefit on the backs of the taxpayers you had nothing to do with, and your husband was taken care of through his life.
Yeah.
So it's all these things and stuff that I look at. Or, we hear food insecurities, right? All the time. Food insecurities. We can't feed the kids. We can't do this. So my question to the school boards and to everybody is, okay, if we have food insecurities, then tell me why, like let's take Massachusetts. Why would we be spending $10 million a year on diversity surveys between our 5-year-olds and our 9-year-olds? How about we don't spend the money on stupid stuff like that and feed our kids and stuff? So I don't have to raise somebody's taxes. We have to have real conversations that says, what is important here? Do I feed the children, or do I ask my 6-year-old, how he feels about the opposite sex, or does he feel like a boy or a girl? Like any 5-6-year-old is even thinking about that.
Yeah, it always makes me think of Step Brothers, right? The movie Step Brothers, where he's like, don't give up, like, being like, you want to be a musician. He's like, Dad, my dream's stupid. He goes, listen, when I was 7, I wanted to be a dinosaur. That's stupid. And it's like, but no, really, right? Really, wind the clocks back 10 years. I was really dead set on being a doctor. I got into medical school and it was great. Wind the clock back, 25 years. And yeah, I probably wanted to be a dinosaur. But that's just kind of a side thing for another. Yeah, no, it's dumb as shit. Excuse my French. I'm trying to swear.
No, you're fine.
But to move from there so one of the people I've interviewed 8 times now is Dr. Robert Malone, inventor of the mRNA vaccine, and it's becoming less of an issue now with Putin invading Ukraine. But your thoughts on COVID vax mandates, because until they're abolished, I don't think that I can really completely take my foot off the gas.
No, we need to, on that one, we all need to, stripping away our liberties and our freedoms is as un-American as anything. It is choice and stuff. If you want to have the vaccine, take the vaccine. If you don't, then don't. But this fallacy that was created by our government and stuff, that if you take the vaccine, you won't catch COVID and you won't spread it. Well, that's a bunch of BS, because we all know and stuff that, the people, and especially on this last variant, the
Omicron.
Thank you, Omicron variant and stuff, the people that were catching it were the vaccinated. And, when like I look at the hospital stats and everyone's like, oh, the people that are unvaccinated are the majority that are in the hospital. And you look at the numbers and go, okay, so what we're really not saying to the people is what you said is technically correct. So let me get this right. 51% of the hospitalizations for COVID are unvaccinated, but 49.5% are vaccinated. But you skip over that. It's basically a 50-50.
Yeah.
And I am vaccinated, and and look, that was probably the only fight that Julian won with me in 20 years and stuff. And I was supposed to run in 2020. Unfortunately, I make a joke about this. I had to suspend my campaign. I had a stroke. A stroke saved my life. They learned that I had 3 brain aneurysms. I had to have 4 brain surgeries to get them removed. It took me a year to learn how to talk again. So my last surgery was 15 months ago, and I stood my campaign up, a year ago, March. So basically a year ago now, and said, okay, I can talk. My health is back, and I'm back out there. And stuff, and again, you don't cry over spilt milk. I have a goal and a determination to make things better, for you, for your children or future children, for mine and everybody else's. And you know what? Great. I got sick. I had to recover, and I'm back. And that's what we want people to look at, not in stuff. Oh, I'm just gonna chill, or I'm gonna give up, or I'm gonna do less, and then blame someone else 5 years down the road that I don't maintain the same lifestyle.
Yeah.
Well, if I want to maintain the same lifestyle, I got to put the same efforts in that I did beforehand. People get sick, and then you get better. So I'm a very common sense approach to things. But anyway, so I did get vaccinated. I didn't get boosted. And then what was funny is, after Julian forced me, coming back from CPAC a year ago, that if I wanted to run, the only way he would let me run was to get vaccinated. and stuff. So I got vaccinated. And then what did my neurologist say to me? Oh my God, you've checked in with me on everything. We never would have let you get vaccinated just for the pure risk that you could get a clot, because they did put 2 stents in my brain. So then they put me on blood thinners for 6 months to make sure everything cleared my system. Now my son, absolutely not, and stuff. Ryland is a different circumstance and stuff. He was born addicted to heroin. Me and Julian got him when he was 2 days old. And effectively for the first 3 years of his life, he, lived kind of like in a bubble. He couldn't go outside or do things that normal kids could because he couldn't breathe.
Sure.
So I said to the schools and everybody, I'm like, over my dead body and stuff. He's not getting vaccinated. I still have his organs measured every 6 months and stuff. And this will continue for several more years. And he's not getting vaccinated. And there's nobody that's going to convince me otherwise. And that's what I mean about choice. People have to make choices with their doctors, and now you see what the CDC, the numbers are cooked, which we did, we obviously already knew, but now, they're getting caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And then you're figuring out with these vaccines and stuff that there really were about 14% effective. But yet we destroyed our country, our economy, all of these different things. And we spent $13 trillion between stimulus and the federal, the Fed just printing money. And okay, now what are we going to do? That's when you really have to look and go, okay, millennials, I hope you got your shit together, because you're just going to have to push through this. And then you look at, the younger Gen Zs or, to my daughter and go, we don't fix this and stuff. We really have a dependent country and stuff. And this is why they're attracted to socialism. And we're one, what do we always hear in every election? We're one election away and stuff, but there really is truth to that. We can only go down this road, so much longer before there's just no way to return from it and stuff, because what are you going to do and stuff? Our GDP, right now is 22, 23 trillion as a country. And we're 31 trillion or heading to 31 trillion in the hole, not counting, unfunded liabilities and stuff. So anyway, sorry.
No, that was absolutely wonderful. No, it's, but all these things we're talking about, right? Be it a critical race theory, or be it, dividing people by, which is, the opposite of MLK, to not be judged, to be judged by the character of your, of who you are, as opposed to what you look like. That's now everything that's being driven. So that CRT, vaccine efficacy, all these things that are being discussed, right? That the reason why I was banned from YouTube was for interviewing Peter McCullough, and just told people to take vitamin D.
Right.
There's sort of you can take all these things, right? So we can take you working at the fish packing plant, or the steakhouse, or childcare, or you overcoming your brain surgeries, all these things. And then what can we do? We can boil down what's the bottom thing. The bottom thing is you take the hand you're given and you work your ass off. So just like that, we can take all these other problems, CRT, debt, where did COVID come from? What's fake news? What isn't? Was there election fraud? Are the vaccines, do they work? They're all boiled down to the same thing, and it's the free flow of information. It's the free flow and your ability to speak. And I'm not stupid. I understand these are private companies. However, this is all there's one plug, there's one hairball in the drain. And nothing's ever this black and white. But to me, it's big tech's ability to just squash conversation and not allow. We can now say that we know that they're only 14% effective. But if you said that 2 years ago, well, no. We got to this point, as with all things, they didn't just used to think the earth was flat. Some people thought it was round, but also thought it was on top of a turtle. There are different views. All things are fake news until we do get down to the science. We don't know. They used to think that inside of every sperm cell was a homunculus. That was in like the 1800s. They thought there were little people with clothes on. That was wrong, but they were kind of right. They were kind of, I'm serious, but they were kind of right. They're like, hey, the sperm cell is where it all starts. Okay. So all these things, if someone says fake news or conspiracy theory, all scientific fact and social fact is at one point a conspiracy. You're throwing everything at the wall. You have to
Yeah.
have the free flow of information. And when we have just a small, I mean, we call them billionaires, and I'm not against a billionaire. I hope to be one. But I mean, we look at Russia, we go, the oligarchs. We have big tech oligarchs. And
Yes,
when
we
you
do.
only, yeah, when you only have Facebook, which is really one Meta, you have Zuckerberg. So when you have Facebook, Instagram, when you have YouTube, Google, when you have Twitter, when you have Snapchat, when you have TikTok, and you have Reddit, it's really easy when you've only got a handful of people that you got to bring into the government and say, hey, this is for national security, just like they did right after 9/11 when they went to the heads of all the telecom companies. You only have to corrupt a handful of people to massively sway what happens in the real world. And then you can dress it up with national security. You can say that you got an NDA and then you got an NDA on your NDA. The idea, and we saw it with Jen Psaki saying, I think towards the end of last year, we're working closely with Facebook and other social media companies on flagging misinformation. Well, once you move the Overton window and say that the White House can now affect free speech, it doesn't matter if it's about vaccines or if it's about what the debt ceiling is, or if it's about, whatever. You are now saying that the people in the White House can affect what can be discussed. And the White House is made up of politicians who are lobbied by private corporations. It is fascism. It is the marrying of corporations and state. So that whole ramble, you can tell I get passionate about this because my white Irish skin starts to boil up and get red. And not every candidate I've talked to has an opinion on this or a plan. So I can't fault you if you don't. But what are you going to do about Section 230, or more specifically, the idea that these digital monopolies are, because we're seeing the real world effects. You can't talk about vaccines. You can't talk about crime. You can't talk about should we, what's going on in 2 weeks ago. If you said there were U.S. biolabs in Ukraine, you would get banned from Twitter for misinformation. A week later, we're coming out and saying we got to secure the U.S. biolabs in Ukraine because we don't want Russia to get it. So sorry for that, but your thoughts on all that?
So look, I am a component of, I want to break them up. They're too big. I don't think that there's anything in the 230 that we can do that is going to regulate Google, Meta, any of these organizations. They're too big. They need to be broken apart. Then we need to change the legislation. And one of the things I was working on to stay with this is, let's look, when we look at everything that happened, through the rioting, the causing billions in damage, all of these different things. And I look at who's responsible. Big tech is responsible. Media is responsible. All of, woke corporations are responsible and stuff. And I said, well, wait a minute. Let's start with, I'm going to go backwards here. Woke corporations, everyone says, oh, they're a private business. The hell they are. They are publicly traded, and the majority of American citizens have their retirements and pension funds tied up inside those companies. And then what happens every time Google or one of these companies make a mistake that costs them billions and billions of dollars, it's not the people at the top that are losing their money. They go, oops, well, everyone that their retirement account, they just lost 30-40%. And it's the citizens that have to, rebuild their retirement while these companies steal the retirement because that's where their funding is coming from. So there's no risk to the billionaires. The risk is to, like my teachers or employees that are putting, 10% of their paycheck or 5% of their paycheck into a future retirement. So I don't buy the notion that these are private companies. My little business is a private business. I don't take any public funds. I'm not publicly traded and stuff. It's my money. So you can label me as a private business and stuff. But when I'm taking people's pension money or retirement money, you're not a private business and stuff. You are subject to those investors. And we need to really draw a line on that. And so then when we come to the media, we're not allowed, when we look at free speech, of course, freedom of press, free speech, absolutely, and stuff, it belongs there. But when you use like screaming fire in a crowded movie theater is illegal, when the media and big tech create the very situation that caused the death and destruction that we watched, there must be a way to hold them accountable and not allow them to hide behind free press or freedom of speech, because absolutely not. This wasn't freedom of speech. You came out and flat out lied your ass off and caused this division in our country. Now move that to a politician. One of the things that I think is most outrageous in a congressperson is that I get elected and I can say whatever I want and there's no consequences to me other than I could get voted out of office and stuff, but there's no legal holding me responsible. So I can come back here to Massachusetts and throw all the bombs, go back to DC while Boston's burning because I just caused this whole riot to happen. How am I not responsible? Just because I'm a congressperson, I have the right to say whatever I want, regardless of the destruction and stuff. So, I don't know how to fix this yet. I've been working on it for months because I do think there has to be accountability. You can't recall me as a congressperson and stuff. So you can impeach a president, you can impeach or recall a governor, depending on your state. Everybody's got these different, mechanisms, but there is no mechanism to hold a congressperson or a senator accountable other than to vote them out. And that's just nonsense. When think about Adam Schiff. What a lying little weasel, and the destruction or the Russia, and all of this stuff. Who's responsible for what they did to this country? And the fact that half of our country still believe that Russia is real.
Yeah.
And you just sit there going, wait, and stuff. And really, I look at my daughter, right? It's her generation that's drinking this Kool-Aid along with their teachers and stuff. And we've got to fix that. You can have free speech, but free speech should not come in the form if it causes harm. If you look at let's take that to religion. Freedom of religion and free speech is our First Amendment. What was America founded on? Our ability to be free and to worship the way that we see it. That's how America came to be, right?
Yeah.
And that's where freedom of speech came. But that thin line between free speech and freedom of religion is you cannot weaponize your religious belief to seek harm on somebody else and stuff. So if we know that that is a line that can't be crossed, then there's got to be a way that we can hold media, tech, and politicians accountable without them hiding behind, it's free speech. Be damned that the 100 people just died. That's irrelevant and stuff. My lies may have caused that, but you can't hold me accountable because I was allowed to say it. But if you as an individual go to say it, well, the Department of Justice will find some way to hold you accountable, i.e. look at January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff.
Yeah, sorry.
And then you think about January 6th, right? No one talks about, what was it? I want to go back to, I think it was February, January. It was the Department of Energy and Department of Labor, if I have this right, and stuff, that we did have an insurrection after January 6th when the Senate was questioning the Attorney General, and he asked them about, hey, what just happened 2 blocks away from the Department of Justice? These people died. These buildings were taken over, I believe, for, I think it was 36 hours. Nobody's talking about that. No one talks about, this is the first time that something like this happened in Washington, D.C. Wasn't it just a few months previous to January 6th that the president of the United States was being taken to the bunker because people were overtaking the White House and burned the church? So yes, January 6th should not have happened. It on its face, it's disgusting, but you have to look at all of it. And if you won't look at all of it, well, then really you're just throwing bombs and you have no real reason that you're trying to say you want to solve something, because you got to look at all of it. And all of it does stem from, I'm going back to Adam Schiff and them. This all started with this Russia bullshit and just perpetuated it forward and forward. And we watched it just morph into this. And now we look, even now, we look at Ukraine and you listen to people, oh, it's Trump's fault. What the hell does Trump have to do with what's happening in Ukraine right now?
Yeah,
And stuff, listen, I can tell you the things I like about Trump and the things that I don't and
sure.
stuff. His policies are spot on and stuff. 95% of his policies were solid for all of us
Yeah.
and stuff. Was his tone sometimes a little over? I can certainly admit to there were many times I'm looking at the TV going, "Don't say it, don't say it." Oh shit, you said it.
Shut up. Just, hey, I love his policies too. The reality is he's got a fake tan. He's on his third wife, and he has the presidential character of me. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay to look at him and go, hey, Michael Jordan. Apparently, Michael Jordan's an asshole. He cheats on his wife and is addicted to gambling. However, if I'm running a basketball team, I want Michael Jordan.
Right.
It's so no, I agree with that. But everything you're saying about, I mean, when we have but let's just look at another example. Let's look at it's now coming out. I don't think it was ever a surprise to anyone, but it's now coming out that they gave over $1 billion to media conglomerates to run vaccination ads, which I'm not vaccinated. I'm not for it. Everyone I know has it. That's really not too much of a surprise to me. Sure, of course, it's during a pandemic. Of course, the government's gonna. That's not surprising to me. But it was only positive coverage. You could only do positive coverage of it. So when we look at the over 24,000 deaths in the VAERS system, now there is a very real effect to what they were pushing. I've interviewed Dr. George Freed and Dr. Brian Tyson, the latter of which is also running for Congress out of California. They've treated over 10,000 people in the Imperial Valley of California, ages 18 to 90 for COVID, 100% success rate by using alternative treatments, but they were censored. I think they were even visited by like DHS. We're looking at very real things. And when the company's standing to make this money, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, it's not even like that there was some cap on the amount of money they could make. They're making record-breaking profits quarter after quarter after quarter on this. You cannot look at that and say that there was no effect from censorship of alternative treatments and artificially pushing another treatment. There are tens of thousands of people dead because of it. And again, if you want the vaccine, go for it. Get 10. I don't give a shit. Take a booster every day. Go wild. To me, there are very real effects. Or Maxine Waters on summer 2020, get up in a Trump supporter's face. Don't let them kill you. That is incitation of violence. You cannot have that. And yeah, now I'm getting worked up, but that is a huge thing though. But to me, it's one of the core things that I think a lot of other problems could be alleviated by is the free flow of information. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt did it in the early 1900s. These things are massive and they are affecting every part of our life. Yes, sure, private corporations. They are the digital town square. And during a pandemic, when you legally could not meet in a town square, they became the de facto town square. And when you have that, you can't have a group of people who have their own leanings or their own financial interest in going, don't say anything about hydroxychloroquine, character assassinate them. I mean, if I can have on the inventor of the mRNA vaccine and get suspended from YouTube and then ultimately banned, you're banning the voice, the guy with the 8 patents who created it, can't talk about it. To me, that is when I had on a CIA veteran right after a veteran 20-year analyst right after the election in 2020, and she started talking about, all the fraud, and I got suspended for that. If we're not listening to these people, who are the professionals and who deemed themselves a professional? And to me, it's not even that it's about the election or about COVID. What we're doing is we're moving the Overton window to where people accept the idea that there are topics that you cannot talk about, and it's for your own safety. You can plug and play. It's like Mad Libs. Remove COVID and put in Ukraine. Remove election fraud and put in whatever the next big news story is. There's going to, like everything else, there's going to be some other thing in 6 months that everyone changes their profile picture to. Who knows? You'll never have cared about it before, and then all of a sudden they'll be passionate about it. We're plugging and playing, and all you got to do is run that simulation out another 2 years, another 10 years, another 20 years. And then all of a sudden we have a generation growing up and it's just normalized that you're not allowed to talk about this. You're not allowed to talk about that. You and I are going to be old farts going, no, there's free speech. You're allowed to talk about it. We're going to be like these old racists and then you're going to go, oh, this is how the country devolves.
Right, this is the way the game is played. And if the country is so, think about it this way. I'm in Massachusetts, right? You can't be more blue, next to California.
Yeah.
And stuff. But if everyone is so uptight about COVID, right? Okay, we all know that this was a man-made disease. It was made in China, funded by America. Let's not pull any punches on this. It leaked out of the lab. So then we look and say, okay, where is all of us not screaming from the top of our lungs? We will not allow these things or this type of research to be done anywhere in the world anymore. We learn about the 2,500 or 25 biolabs in Ukraine now that we've got to be worried about. And then this feckless Romney comes out and goes after Tessie. I'm sorry, I'm messing up her name. The congresswoman out of Hawaii and stuff was running for president.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Yes, thank you. And saying that, she's treasonous for talking about this. And you're going, what are you talking about? Shouldn't we all be talking about this? What's the next pandemic? Should we let another pandemic out to the world that happens to be, again, funded by America in another country? And what's this one going to cost us? 20 trillion? How long are we going to get locked down for again? Like, where the hell are our politicians, or really just everyday citizens? I mean, we all really can't just have our heads so buried that we don't recognize. But you know what? In fairness to our fellow citizens, when the media doesn't cover it, as I said to one of my ex-GC that was running my campaign, and he's not running my campaign anymore over this type of stuff, because he would say to me all the time, well, no one's talking about it, or it's not on the media. You're right. And I would push back and say, just because the national media doesn't want to cover it and stuff doesn't mean that it's not true. And it doesn't mean that I shouldn't be out there talking about it. And, my job to try to win in Congress is to come out and tell the truth, whether that's comfortable or not comfortable. I'm going to come out, tell the truth. I'm going to give you a solution. That solution may be my opinion for a solution. And then you have to decide, do you like my solution or do you not? And stuff. But to go out there and, just, hand me pieces of paper and say, read this. No. If I wanted to read this, I would just donate to a feckless politician and stuff. I'm not a politician. I am a everyday American. I'm a small business owner who, like everybody else, is pissed off and just wants common sense brought back to our government. And Congress cannot continue to shuck its responsibilities and just pass everything to unelected bureaucrats that are destroying this country and stuff. We have oversight. One of the proposals I want to make is no new regulation coming to our schools, to the EPA or banking, any of these things. No new regulation can be passed on the American citizens until the bureaucrats have brought it to Congress and Congress passes that new legislation. Nobody should be making laws or making regulations on America or her citizens. That's what we have elected officials for. And they're not doing their job. It's like passing the war responsibilities to the White House or to the executive branch. No, it belongs in Congress. We need Congress people or persons, if we're being PC and stuff. We need a proper Congress that actually does their jobs. And we need to teach our citizens to throw your politicians out every time they punt their job that they're being paid for to an unelected bureaucrat, because they don't have skin in the game. And we've got to look at the top of all, one of the things I think Trump was right on, and I don't know if we'll ever see it happen, but break up Washington, D.C. Take every one of these departments and go place them where they belong. Department of Energy, move it down to Texas and stuff. If it's agriculture, move it out to Ohio or Idaho. Put these agencies where they belong and take the power out of DC, which will also stop this nonsense of trying to turn DC into a state, because when you take away the government, there is no state that anybody wants. and shrink the government. I'm a states' rights guy. Shrink the federal government and give the money back to the states, and really, in some cases, bypass the state and go right to the local, government and stuff, and get it into the cities and towns and let them do what is best. It'll be cheaper and more effective. And one of the, I'll use this example for you on childcare. If you look at, I'm in the daycare business, so I do kids that are 6 years old to 6 years old. Just like, now the government version of that is mock. So my $1.2 million daycare center in revenue, right? Let's say, 85 kids. Now take those same 85 kids and put them into mock, which is a federal program. That same program costs over $10 million to run. There's no differences in expenses, payroll, any of the above. It's all about these executives and, you're an executive director or you're this or you're that. None of these things that are needed. Doesn't make education better. In fact, it was Cato that did the study, and showed how $10 billion got wasted inside mock. Now, I run my little business at $1.2 million in revenue and stuff. I make a good middle class lifestyle for me and my family. I take care of all of my employees. I don't have any employees that are anywhere near $15 an hour. They're all well beyond that, and stuff. And you take care of people and stuff. So the question becomes, how can I or any other small business run the exact same business, get the same result, if not a better result, but yet we're able to do it for $9 million less per center and stuff. So no, we don't want the government to expand childcare and stuff. We need government to get out of the way of all businesses and let us grow. That's how small businesses turn into mid-sized businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And stuff, just get the government out of our way.
Talking to you is getting my blood pressure up. I'm getting all jacked up. I'm gonna start screaming, banging the table. I'm like, yes. Mr. Paquette, let's do like another 5 minutes. I would love to have you on again. I think you're a total badass, man. You're definitely one of the coolest guys I've talked to. There's nothing. No, I'm serious. This is episode 754. You can definitely tell when people are saying what they think I want to hear or what they think others want to hear. You're definitely just letting it fire from the hip as who you are, and I respect that. For anything and for everybody listening, I'll put all the links to your website, social media, all that good stuff in the description. But before we close it out, anything we haven't touched on that you maybe want to touch on? And again, like I said, we can always another episode.
Secure the border.
The border. Yeah.
Yeah, and stuff. We must secure the border and stuff, and we can just count down the ways. 100,000 dead Americans last year on overdoses and stuff. Or, when we think about Obamacare. Obamacare came in to our orbit, 14 years ago now? And the argument then was we had 33 million Americans that were uninsured. That was the argument that was made. Well, 14 years later, we still have 33 million or 36 million Americans uninsured. Let's start to ask the question why. Every time we go to lift 2 million Americans up off the poverty levels, we import 2 million over the border, and we drive these 2 million back down because these 2 million that came in and took the jobs just put these ones back. It's this cycle that keeps going. Then when you look at human trafficking, it's $150 billion industry worldwide. 18 to 22 million women and children are trafficked every year. That's $100 billion of that industry is right here in America. We have 500 times the amount of slaves in America today than we had 164 years ago when we ended the Civil War. So you can't say America is a free country when we have on average 18 million women and children that are being trafficked, whether sex trafficked, work trafficked, whatever it is, and stuff. This is a big deal, and we need to solve it. And as Americans, we've got to start talking about it. Most people don't even realize how big the problem is and stuff. And until I spent a year, I met with all the different divisions of the state police, worked my way through, having to get clearance to the next meeting, and stuff to, the last meeting was, you can't bring in anything to write, record, or anything. You can just have the meeting, ask questions, and we'll educate you. But this meeting didn't happen, one of those meetings and stuff, which got me to the FBI and stuff. And you look and go, how is this possible? And stuff. We have a thriving $100 billion industry, and these kids only have a 2 to 5 year life cycle and stuff. So, when they say, kids are disappearing, or, we had 5,000 kids just a few months ago disappear from HHS, that they had put the government, we put these children in care with guardians or foster care, whatever system we put them in. And the kids disappeared along with the guardians. Nobody knows where they are. And they just stopped talking about it. It flashed, I think, either Newsmax or something flew across my phone. That's what got my attention to go research it. And it just disappeared. And so 5,000 kids, poof, gone. No one wants to talk about it. And, we're only talking about a few months ago.
I've interviewed Christy Wells from Safe House Project. Yeah, it's they run like safe houses for human trafficking victims. Yeah, all those things. $150 billion. The life expectancy either is curtailed either from suicide or drug use.
Yep.
Yeah, it's such a massive industry. When you realize just how much of it seems to come out of like foster homes, when you look at how the government can turn off like a light switch, like let's say in Canada, if it happens in Canada, I know it can happen here. We're better intel than them, better technology than them. If they can just flip off your crypto wallets because you partook in a protest,
right?
How come that hasn't happened? If we can track down these people, if we can shadow ban them on social media, if we can dox them, if we can throw financial sanctions on them, if we can know your vaccination status, if we can track you everywhere you are, we can't do it with literal human traffickers. I mean, the only logical conclusion is complicity. That's really that.
Well, it is. What you're asking, how many of our own elected officials are involved in it? And not being a conspiracy theorist, but you know what? There's just no way that anybody in the know doesn't know what is happening here. And you're right. 70% of all human trafficking happens out of our foster care system. The other 30% crosses our border. And and when I talk to people about it, they always point to the border first. And I'm like, you know what? The bigger part of the problem has nothing to do with the border. Yeah. It has everything to do with our government agencies and foster care. And you hit that right on the head. That's accurate.
Oh yeah, no, and you and I probably have a life expectancy of about a month after this episode, as we will both, you'll find both of us with our cars in ditches. Funny how that.
And look, I look at it this way, right? What country, right? If we're killing 100,000 Americans every year, why is our military not crossing the border down to Mexico and just saying, done, the drugs stop, all this shit stops, and you move our damn military in, and you just simply go, Mexico, you got 60 days. Clean it up. Our military is sitting right here, just like you kind of watch the military, Russia, sitting on Ukraine. Put our military there and say, you got 60 days or we're coming in.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Do you think Mexico will clean it up? Probably.
Yeah, and you wonder why we're not doing it. It's complicity. It's dark money. Yeah. It's exactly what it is. There's no other reason for it. There's no other reason for it. If we can look at a pimple on your ass from space, but we can't stop fentanyl from coming over the border. It's exactly what it is. It's complicity. It's nothing more.
And you realize how much we're tracked. And I'll give it to you on an easier one, because this was eye-opening for me when you learn, you get into politics, right? I'm not a politician. And, I always thought my vote is a secret. You have no idea what party I voted for, who I voted for. And then, they burst my bubble when I realized I know exactly who you voted for, how many times you voted, what your, they call it infinity scores and stuff like that. But I was blown away to realize, there's no secret here. It might be a secret to my neighbor, but for the person that's in the know that needs to get, collect all this data or pay for the data, all of a sudden I go, I know exactly what my neighbors are up to as far as their voting habits. And that shocks people, because I think as Americans, we all think that our vote is a secret.
Yeah. And
it's not.
then you have an AOC character saying, you know, make lists of your Trump supporter friends, which is, I mean, would make Stalin blush. It's start making lists. That's coming. But Mr. Paquette, let's end this one. Let's wrap this one up. That was an awesome
Absolutely.
episode. You're a total badass. It's that was fucking awesome, man. I would love to support you in any way I can. You're a real one.
Thank you.
You don't give a shit, and I like that.
No, we got to do what's right.
Hell yeah. And if Mr. Paquette and myself are dead within 30 days, you guys know who did it. And but I'll email this episode to your guy, and would love to have you on here again. And I look forward to talking to you, man.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless America.